It's the physics behind, for example,
Another
the reactions,
question people
the
think
reaction, the actual change in
under
mass.
the ultimate question about
during
profit.
the course of 7 years in which the book was put together.
Tonight in the Scholars Chair, a conversation with Dr. Christopher Harris from Brickman Lab at the National Institutes of Health. His PhD is in neuroscience from the University of Sussex, Brighton, UK, where he developed a technique of monitoring neural circuits in an intact invertebrate's brain. At Focus, what is neuroscience? What are the benefits to society? And further, what are the moral, ethical concerns of brain manipulation? Dr. Harris for 30 minutes right here in the Scholars Chair.
Conditions of inequality that we suffered under when we are the oppressor, the dominant class, let's not impose that injustice on the others.
Anybody think that you could have a just system without giving women their rights?
Everyone has an opinion, and we sit around the marketplace and talk about opinion, but what is truth?
With the shareholder, their goal is similar to the business, to maximize profit.
That belief becomes a context for a development of knowledge.
Say physics is the DNA of technology because the rules for how you build new technology starts in physics.
Because Quran challenges the people. It's not only the people of the book, it challenges Muslims.
We say secular, they hear godless.
Right.
What was intended?
Watch the Scholars Chair every Monday night. And here is your host. Dr. Harris, welcome to the Scholars Chair.
Thank you.
I'm glad you could make it. Let me ask you the first question. What is neuroscience?
Neuroscience is the study of the brain and spinal cord. And what makes it so fascinating is that everything that we are, our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, our desires, our intentions, all of that is contained in the brain. And so even though many neuroscientists don't study human memory or human thought or feeling, they might not even study the human brain at all. They might study a much smaller system. Like me, I study fish brains. What's crucial is that the same principles apply throughout the animal kingdom, and especially among vertebrates and mammals. The same principles of brain function can be found in many different animals.
And of course, how would the general society use this data?
Well, mainly for medicine, for neurology. Diseases and disorders of the brain are, I believe, the most costly part of kind of human disability. And that's because we're so bad at fixing it.
Yes.
Because until recently, understanding and manipulating the brain has been almost impossible because of its sheer complexity.
So I think that most people still have an image of Frankenstein. I don't know if they have Frankenstein in the UK.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just an image that I've heard since I've told people that we were doing this.
Sure.
But tell me, what is your particular interest in studying the nervous system? And
so my focus has always been motivation and understanding how it is that a brain, even the brain of a small animal, can want something and go about going out into the world to seek it out and to execute actions to achieve its goals. So that could be food, it could be social interactions, it could be the search for money, or even the search for a new idea.
Is the motivation internal, or is it purely the eyes and ears and senses connecting and creating a signal and causing the person to move?
Right. No, it's internal. The brain has a enormous capacity to generate desires and drives. That's what I'm interested in.
The need is biological, yes, and the brain is making sure that the body is content or is motivated to get.
That's right. I mean, the need is at bottom biological, but what's interesting in humans, but also in some other species, is that we can take this primordial search for food, for security, for power, and we can turn that into the search for a movie for a night, or the search for a new job, or high school diploma, or something like that. We have this ability to construct much bigger goals than any other animal on the planet.
And why is that, do you think?
Well, it's that's what makes humans special, is our enormous cortex, and especially our enormous frontal lobe. The bit just behind the forehead is what creates our complicated, our decision maker and our very complicated plans that we live every day.
So tell me, what is the difference between neurobiology and neuroscience? I mean, I've heard both terms used.
Yeah. There's not a huge difference. Neuroscience used to be a branch of biology, and today it's expanded into other fields like robotics and psychology and engineering, even, and computer science, and so on. And so today people use the word neuroscience much more commonly, whereas before maybe neurobiology would be the more common term.
Because the field has gotten more complex, and we need I think these various different other disciplines participating in helping us define it, right?
Right.
Tell me, this seems to me that it runs smack into ethics, and I want to know, are there any new concerns in the area of ethics in your field?
Absolutely. So I mean, there's the persistent concern of making sure that patients and animals that are part of the experiments are cared for, and the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, are extremely good about this. They have very, very strict rules for animal care and patient care. But specific to neuroscience, there are emerging questions about where the field is taking us, and by us I mean humanity. You already have parents giving their children Ritalin, for instance. You have a lot of people taking antidepressants. And these treatments are only going to get better. And it's not clear where we're going to be in 20 years, say, as new drugs and new other treatments come onto the market and give us the ability to maybe choose a bit more what kind of a personality, what kind of temperament we want ourselves and our family to have.
Yes. That is a very challenging prospect.
Yes, indeed. Yes,
and I think in my audience, I believe that there are people are thinking that scientific community is essentially this huge community of atheists that's creating a non-ethical environment for us. So I think that you're probably running into scientists. The scientific community is running into the community of theology, of theologians, and religion. How does the scientific community? How do you personally reconcile science and religion? Just before we started, there was someone who actually said, "Oh my goodness, they're trying to be gods." You know, I'm sure you have heard it a few times yourself.
Right.
But tell me, how do you reconcile the how of science and the why of religion?
Right. It's hard. It's challenging. In my experience, I find that there are two ways that people, not just scientists, but people generally try to reconcile science and religion. And one is to make the religion more like interpreted myth. So the stories of the Bible or the Quran or whichever faith you belong to, you make those stories important but mythical happenings. And so you might go back to the Garden of Eden and learn something about humanity's place in the world. but you don't believe that that's actually how the Earth came about.
Sure.
That sort of thing is what I see a lot of people doing. The problem with that approach is that it can lead to a place where there is no longer a personal God who hears prayer and answers prayer in this world, and there might not even be an afterlife to look forward to. And so, but the alternative approach to reconciling science and religion is to simply kind of corner off religion and religious concepts from critical, skeptical inquiry that requires proof, that requires hard evidence, and that requires you to be able to study the things that are being talked about. You know, as a child, I often thought, what is heaven actually like? Like, what does it smell like? What does it taste like? Where exactly is it? All those questions are, for me and for some other people, very hard to not ask.
Yes, to not ask. But I think that you have to, in the discipline you've chosen, you have to ask those hard questions.
Yeah.
And I think we find ourselves in the same predicament. We don't know, other than the data that many theologians cite. It is a Quranic reference or a biblical reference or a Torah, something from the Torah, and that's just about the best we can do with it. In preparing for this interview, I was telling you, I because you reference him in your paper here, or in the paper you shared with me, Mr. Elman. One of the interviews, he said that with his patients, he would not tell them that you have no afterlife to look forward to. He said because in the brain there's something chemically happens when they feel good about the idea of an afterlife. But that's not a scientific inquiry, and we've asked you to come to talk about science.
Sure.
Tell us about the molecular and the cellular neuroscience. What are those two things?
Well, like we said before, the neuroscience started out as a branch of biology. It was the study of the brain, like you could study the brain like you studied the liver or the bones or the eye or something like that. And the brain, like any other organ, consists of cells, and cells are just an individual cell is enormously complex, and there is this entire genetic machinery that we're just starting to fully get a grip on. And so all of those basic principles of cells apply to brain cells as well. So that's cellular and molecular neuroscience.
Yes. What do you do for NIH at the moment? What gets you started in the morning?
So we're combining two techniques that allow us to first look at a brain as either a small part of a brain, or in the case of a fish, we can look at the entire brain. Having seen which neurons in the brain are involved in which behaviors, we're able to take the same brain and put it in what's called an electron microscope, which gives us a extremely fine structural resolution image of the brain. And that allows us to go from knowing which neurons do what to how they're connected at the nanometer level.
Yes.
That's the aim. That's kind of the project that we're trying to make happen at the moment.
When you're looking at it using the microscope, what level are you looking at? At the atomic level or the cellular level?
Cellular level. It's sort of in between the cellular and atomic level.
I see. So you're watching chemistry happen?
Not really chemistry, but we're watching, we can see the membranes of the cells, for instance. Neurons, brain cells have this enormously complex branches that they send out to connect to other neurons. And using the electron microscope, we can actually track each individual branch and see which other neuron it makes contact with.
Wow, that is incredible. I would love to see a demonstration of that, but I noticed it online that people were doing exactly what you were. To me, when I see it at the level, it looks like a forest of trees. I mean, it is
very much like that.
Yeah, very complex. Tell me, what is called the neural circuits and systems? What are those two things?
Right. So the brain gets its power from these connections and the pattern of connections that you have. So depending on how a region is wired up, it acquires a certain function. So there are circuits and systems in your brain that are specialized at detecting faces or producing speech or understanding speech, or even there are individual cells and circuits that detect movement in different directions, etc. And all of that depends on the wiring. And so a circuit is a small or medium-sized group of neurons that are wired together in a defined way.
I see.
And then a system is a many circuits that are wired up together in order to achieve a certain mental function.
Now, is it true that each organism, including each human being, this configuration is different?
I mean, no, not really. Up to a point. So our brains are different. They have to be, otherwise we would be the same person having the same memories and so on.
Yes.
And so from birth, and even before birth, but from birth, depending on your experiences, your brain will actually change to accommodate your personal experience.
I see.
At the same time, we have very similar brains. If you looked at your brain and my brain, anyone, even a non-specialist, would be able to say, those are human brains.
I see.
You compare that to a dog's brain or a horse's brain, it would be very different.
Okay, so because they are different. Yeah. I'd like to explore this question actually that you put that you gave to me actually, and I really appreciate it because I think that this question is on the minds of a lot of people, and it's interesting we use that phrase. What is consciousness and personal identity, and how do we find meaning and value emerging from the activity of the human brain? How does that happen?
Right.
Like what is consciousness? You know, how does the activity of the brain create consciousness?
Right. On this point, you'll actually get different answers from different neuroscientists.
This is good.
That's what makes it so interesting, is that even despite all the knowledge we have, this is still very much in debate. There are centers of research for understanding the emergence of consciousness in the brain. Personally, I go with Gerald Edelman, who you mentioned previously, and he saw the brain as a living thing, a bit like a jungle. It's a large system of cells. Again, these very complicated, almost individual and certainly unique little agents in the brain cells, that are constantly communicating with other brain cells. And the important point is that they communicate about something. The brain is always engaged in some activity or other, even if it's just daydreaming. But usually you're going somewhere, or you're seeing something, or you're trying to understand something or say something, and that is the brain. That is the brain and the brain's cells trying to do something that will benefit the organism, the person. And the way they do it is in this organic way. It's like, again, like a jungle. It's kind of a mass, a seething mass of activity, a lot of electrical activity, a lot of chemical activity, and a lot of communication between all these billions and billions of brain cells that are all trying to survive, trying to achieve, trying to grow,
Yes, yes.
That's what's happening inside the brain always. So there's always a purpose to the brain's activity.
Interesting.
There is always meaning, just by its very nature.
Well, we're not talking about the philosophical idea of purpose. We're saying that the brain is actively engaged with solving a problem or delivering data in some activity of that sort.
So the brain is a meaning-making system.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
I like that phrase, a meaning-making system. I have to put that down on our postcard somewhere.
Sure.
Personal identity. How does that work in the brain's activity?
Right. So.
This is the old Cartesian idea. You know, I think, therefore I am. You know, it's we're there again. When a person when the person asks himself or herself the question, "Who am I?" What happens to the brain activity? Maybe that is.
So there are parts of the brain that are more engaged in introspection than others. Absolutely. I think the thing to keep in mind is that you are your brain. It's impossible to get a brain transplant. You can replace any other part of your body and still be the same person. But if you replace the brain, you would go wherever the brain goes, because that's you. And another interesting thing, you replace most of the cells in your body
in a lifetime.
In a lifetime, but in a year even, most of the cells get replaced. The skin cells much quicker.
Yes.
But the brain cells are there. You have the same brain cells now, more or less, that you had when you were 10 years old, because brain cells have this special property that they survive. They survive and they maintain their structure, their connection to other neurons, and that structure encodes your memories and your experiences. And so your brain is a extremely complex, dynamic, living picture of everything that you've experienced. And that stays with you in your skull every day as you go around your business. That's the identity. That's the source of the profound feeling of self that we all have.
So it's deeply connected to your personal experiences.
Absolutely.
So the notion of innate knowledge is almost cannot be applied in this particular instance, would you? I mean, in other words, the human being, you know, what it reminds me of is the old adage of being born into the world with a blank slate, right? Nothing in the brain until you start to engage the world around you. Is that real? Is that something that you can verify or not?
We come into the world with capacities for things. There are some things that we have innately. For instance, with other primates, we share a fear of snakes. That's just there, because snakes are dangerous.
Yes,
and it's important, it's useful to have an innate fear of snakes. But and I mean, we have an innate capacity to learn a language. You can take a human baby and put them in any language, in any society in the world, and they will pick up that language magnificently quickly in most cases. We have a capacity for all kinds of social interactions and so on. But we need the experience for these things to develop. If you move to a new country as an adult, it's much harder to learn a new language. And it's the same with forming social bonds. So a child that hasn't had the appropriate attachments and love and care as a child can have a very hard time to develop such relationships later.
I see.
Because these things have a critical window where they need to be developed. So we come into the world with a capacity for very specific things, but if we don't have the right experiences, then those capacities might not be
maybe developed.
Right.
So tell me about the power of repetitiveness. I mean, these ideas are coming to me as I'm thinking, as you're talking to me. What happens to the brain when something is repeated over and over and over again? What goes on to make Are we talking about developing new tissue? Are we talking about shoring up the brain connections or cell
Well,
cell
you have
connections?
to specify, is the thing that's happening again and again meaningful or pleasurable, or is it boring and uninteresting?
Or painful.
Or painful, that's a third one even. Because if something happens again and again and it's not relevant to you, then you undergo what's called habituation, where the event becomes uninteresting. If something is tapping constantly, eventually you stop even paying attention to it.
Yes.
But if something's happening again and again and it carries some value, then your brain's going to undergo plasticity. It's going to actually grow, like you said, new tissues to accommodate and learn more about this repeating important experience.
Now, if a brain cell dies, you say it's not replaceable? Yes?
In some parts of the brain, brain cells are replaceable. There are, but very small parts. To some extent, the brain can compensate for small strokes. You can get some new neurons coming in, but generally the brain is pretty poor at replacing damaged tissue.
So when you acquire knowledge of something, what happens in the brain? I think you did explain it, but
right. So neurons, again, extend these long branches to connect to other neurons.
Yes.
And the points where they connect are called synapses. And those are the very complicated little end plates of branches that connect to an end plate on another neuron. And these synapses carry the messages, but they also store information depending on their location and which neurons they connect. They store actual memory, actual information. And so when you learn something or you have a new experience that your brain wants to remember, you're going to have actual new synapses formed in different parts of your brain that are going to restructure the activity and the kind of the dynamics of your brain.
Yes. Fascinating a subject. I can see how you can wake up every morning and be excited about it. And you know, the human brain will always be a new frontier for us, maybe forever, you know, but who knows? It's a finite thing, so maybe we'll know everything about it soon. Thank you very much, Dr. Harris, for coming in and talking to us. I just always end my program with a scholar to recommend a book for our readers. And I think what would you recommend for a person who knows nothing about neuroscience? Have to go back to college now. Or maybe even undergrad.
So there is a brain. I'm Swedish. I'm from Sweden, and there is a book by a Swedish author, but it's been translated into English, and I've read it. The translation is good. It's called A Living Soul.
A Living Soul.
And it's about a first-person perspective, and it's the perspective of a brain that's been isolated from its body for medical purposes and is living out its life in an aquarium, in a lab tank.
Interesting.
It's a very good book, written by a medical doctor who knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, well, it sounds interesting in and of itself. The premise is exciting to know about. Chris, thanks for coming in and talking to us on the Scholars Chair. We've been talking to Dr. Christopher Harris. If you want to know more Scholars Chairs, you want to see more programs, go to our YouTube site at Read One Communications and our Facebook account. And you can also send us an email at scholarschair.com. I'm Khalil Shadid. Good night.
Amazing.